Good morning. This is the adult Sunday school lesson from Mount Vernon Baptist Church for February the 7th. Our lesson today is taken from Genesis chapter 39 and 40. The title of it is Joseph is Protected in Egypt. Our application today is quite strong. The student will conclude that he should be faithful to the truth even while he is being mistreated. Now, as we begin this particular stop on our study journey, I think it takes a moment for us to grasp the importance of Joseph and why he is so important to us. Here in the book of Genesis, we are given 14 chapters that speak on Joseph and his life. More than the creation of the universe, more than Father Abraham, more than Isaac, more than Jacob. All this is done so that we might grasp the importance of this man. The lessons that we will learn here as we study the life of Joseph will be very applicable to our own lives today. And this is one of the main reasons that the Lord has given us so much information on Joseph. The other one is that Joseph acts for us as a type, a foreshadow, if you will, of Christ to come. We will see this again and again in the things that happen in the life of Joseph. Now, our last stop on our study journey through Genesis focused on the mistreatment of Joseph by his older brothers. The group to whom Joseph was sold into slavery took him to Egypt and resold him to a high Egyptian official named Potiphar. What happens after that moment now begins to reveal to us much about the further types and shadows found in the Old Testament that are revealed in the New. Jesus himself brought focus on this matter in Luke 24:27 when he spoke with the two on the road to Emmaus. Listen carefully to what Jesus said to these two. And beginning at Moses and all of the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Our study journey has prepared us to better understand those words of Christ. Verse 39:2 quickly teaches us that the Lord was with Joseph, and through him the Lord prospered the house of Potiphar. The reason we ponder this thought is because our first chapter today once more allows us further study into the types and shadows of Genesis. Here, the description of Joseph and his time in Egypt allows us a type of the incarnation of Jesus Christ to come later. What do we see that makes us lean into that view so strongly? First, Joseph becomes a servant. An officer of Pharaoh, Potiphar, bought Joseph from the Ishmaelites who had brought him to Egypt, 39:1. What a contrast from the beloved son in his own father's house to the degradation of slavery in Egypt. Philippians 2 teaches us that Jesus, who was in the form of God, made himself of no reputation and took on him the form of a servant. Joseph the servant was a blessing to others. 34:5 teaches that the house of this Egyptian was blessed for Joseph's sake. Clearly, Israel was blessed that the Son of God was sent to them as a great blessing for the nation. Joseph was sorely tempted by the wife of Potiphar, yet he sinned not. She tried strongly to seduce Joseph, but he knew what a sin that would be, and he refused her advances. Joseph's temptation foreshadowed the seduction attempt by Satan of Jesus in the wilderness. Yet, Jesus refused those advances there, and like Joseph, sinned not. Joseph himself was falsely accused, and he offered no defense. Isaiah 53 is very clear for us that Jesus was falsely accused and tells us how Jesus was oppressed and afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. While in prison, Joseph's predictions came true. Jesus told his apostles exactly what was going to happen to him in great detail, and each detail came true. Remember the 3 crows of the cock? We see that Joseph never became bitter or a resentful man as he endured all of his trials. He did not hate his brothers or those who bought him and took him to Egypt, or his Egyptian masters or his jailers. He knew the Lord had been with him and that he had never been forsaken. Through faith, he believed and knew that his success in Egypt was because God was with him. Later on, he will prove this point when he again met his brothers and told them that they meant evil unto him, but God meant it for good. These types we began to see began with us in Abraham's time, whom we see the first expression was the doctrine of election. And Isaac, we see next the doctrine of divine sonship, with the son of promise not being the firstborn. In Jacob, we see the conflict of the 2 natures of the believer and God's gracious discipline to fulfill his own purpose. Joseph speaks to us of being an heir, when all the sons of God will later fulfill their destiny as heirs and will reign together with the Lord. Joseph further allows us to see the fact that suffering will always go before glory. Each believer will in some way endure some challenges of faith that need to be overcome, which sanctifies us in his image. The very name of Joseph means God has added. We learned that in 30:24. We see that Joseph was a shepherd and was in strong opposition to evil. He revealed the vile things, the things that were done by his half-brothers. He revealed those things to Jacob. And Jesus testified in the same way of the evil works of the world in John 7:7. Joseph held the first position in his father's love. Just as Jesus, he was the son of Isaac's old age. Joseph endured the hatred of his brethren, just as Jesus was rejected of his own. Joseph foretold the future of his own sovereign position, which would be in Egypt, as he revealed his dreams originally to his brothers, causing them to hate him even more. All these factors are important to prepare us for the next stop on our study journey. God was preparing an Egyptian named Potiphar to receive Joseph as a servant in his house while Joseph was still being mistreated by his family. The plan of God is always unfolding according to his will, not according to ours. Now, as Potiphar took Joseph into his house, he quickly recognized the talent of this young Hebrew, and Joseph rose to be in charge over all of the household and to manage it for his new owner. Here's another type for us, as Jesus clearly thought that to be great, one must first be a servant. Luke 22. This handsome and talented young Hebrew drew the eye of the wife of Potiphar. She commands him to come and lie with her in 39:7. This would have been a great sin. And even though the temptation was in front of Joseph, he refused to yield to it. Her attempted seduction of Joseph was repeated, as was his refusals. She used a moment when they were alone in the house to grab his garment and pull him toward her. And Joseph fled from her with his garment in her hand. Because she had been rejected, she grew angry, and she told Potiphar that Joseph made the advances toward her. Potiphar was angered by this lie of his wife, and he had Joseph placed in prison under the false charges of his wife. But verse 39:21 clearly teaches that God was well aware of this matter, and his favor remained with Joseph, protecting him wherever he might be. God's plan, set in place long before, was unfolding for this young man. God had a much larger household for Joseph to run than just the house of Potiphar. But before that time could arrive, Joseph had to endure the unfair treatment that prison time brought him. Once again, his talent was quickly revealed, and the keeper of the prison put all the prisoners under the hand of Joseph. Do we see how Joseph rose to prominence wherever he was? God gave him these abilities, and he willingly used them no matter where he found himself. He did not display a bitter or resentful spirit, and he was as successful in prison as he had been in the house of Potiphar. Do we see the providential hand of God using Joseph and preparing him for even greater things, even while he remained in prison? The Lord did not forsake or leave his own. We must keep this scriptural lesson close to our hearts because it applies to each and every believer. As Joseph prospered in prison, he came to be well known to the other prisoners. There were two former high officials, servants of Pharaoh, in the prison with him. One was actually the cupbearer of Pharaoh, and the other was Pharaoh's chief baker. We are not given the reason that they were in prison, but given their high positions and where they stood in the court, it's likely that a plot to poison Pharaoh had been uncovered, and these two were suspects of the crime. To be there meant they had in some very serious way offended the king himself. These two men were having constant dreams of themselves being downtrodden, and these dreams troubled them very much. They approached Joseph for his opinion as to the meaning of these troubling dreams. These factors are important to prepare us for our next stop on our study journey. Joseph had experienced his own visions and dreams, and he revealed that he believed these were messages from God. The butler's dream was interpreted by Joseph to mean that he would again be restored to the service in Pharaoh, getting back again his former job. Unfortunately, the meaning of the dream of the baker was also given to Joseph, and he revealed that in 3 days the baker would hang for his crime. As Joseph used his wisdom to allow the meaning of these dreams, he asked the butler to remember him to Pharaoh when he was restored. Sadly, when this cupbearer was restored, he forgot the request, and Joseph languished 2 more years in the prison. Pharaoh then had his own troubling dream, and he would share his troubles, concerns with the cupbearer who also served as his butler. And then the butler remembered Joseph, who he knew could help Pharaoh understand his troubling dream. Do we see the hand of God still moving in the hearts of men to fulfill his purpose and only his purpose? Here's a perfect example of the 3 possible answers to the prayers for every Baptist. We know the answer to some prayers is yes. The answer to some prayers is no. The answer that we dislike the most is wait. Surely Joseph was much in prayer as the servant of God who was always under God's protection. For these last 2 years he remained in prison. Joseph received answer number 3 from the Lord, so he faithfully waited. These days for Joseph were far from mountaintops of faith. They were valleys where the darkness of faith rules. But Joseph did not lose his faith, for he knew the Lord had delivered him from the pit where his brothers had thrown him. The Lord had brought him to Egypt, and he would care for him now just as he had before. Our chapters teach us that Joseph's masters were well pleased with him, Potiphar, the jailer, and later Pharaoh himself. We recall that the Heavenly Father spoke to the whole world announcing how well pleased he was with his only begotten son. Joseph remained a blessing to others. Joseph, while innocent, suffered at the hands of the Gentiles, another type of Jesus. Joseph won the respect of his jailer. In Luke 23:47, we are taught that the centurion in charge of the death of Jesus recognized who Jesus truly was. Joseph was numbered among the transgressors, just as Jesus was put to death between 2 thieves. Joseph knew the future, and his predictions came true, just as Jesus predicted his own future and the future of Israel. Joseph desired to be remembered, as he asked the butler to remember him to Pharaoh. Jesus himself said at the Last Supper that those who believe should recreate that moment in memory of him. Next week, we will see how God's plan moves Joseph from prison to prominence over all of Egypt. I hope to see you here.